I want to welcome you to the regular Saturday afternoon sponsorship workshop. This is a meeting of the Stairway Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Jim and I am an alcoholic. Everybody, I'm glad to be here and I'm really happy to see all of you here. It's great to have this kind of a turnout on a Saturday afternoon. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. This workshop is an AA meeting. We have kind of an abbreviated format just so we can have more time for what we need to do here. This meeting is an hour and a half in length, and we take a 10-minute break at the halfway point. And in this meeting we are studying all of those things necessary for us to be sponsors who are responsible and knowledgeable and competent in their sponsorship. And one of the things we try to do is to cut through all of the malarkey and balderdash and baloney that's floating around out there these days, and all the mythology. And we try to get down to the basic stuff that we need to be teaching people in order that they recover. And if anybody tells you that there are no teachers in AA, you say to them, yeah, that's the problem. And the biggest problem in AA today is a lack of good sponsorship. That's why we do these sponsorship workshops. And we've been doing these now for over 14 years. Some of you have been to many of these workshops, 3 or 4, and I know that as a result of doing that, your sponsorship skills have really improved and increased. Oh, there's Marilyn. Well, hey, babe, that's our treasurer, and she's the lady with the key.
Yes, coffee will be ready for the halfway point.
Okay, so we will have coffee. All right. Tonight, the Stairway Group has 2 more meetings. One at 7:30, where we're studying the Big Book together, and one at 9:15, where we're studying Language of the Heart together. So our group has 3 meetings every Saturday, and you're certainly invited to be with us at any time. I'd like to welcome my friend Tracy at the end there with the green shirt on. I haven't seen Tracy in a long time. He and I are old friends. And a couple of our folks from South Beach. Oh, we got how many? We got 3 South Beachers here. I saw somebody following you in. Oh, there's Billy. Oh, that's Billy over there. Yeah. Billy, you've been at what, 3 or 4 of these workshops already, or 3.5? I think you pooped out of the last one about halfway through.
Yeah, I think I pooped out in the last one.
Anyway, we're really pleased to have everybody here, and we're going to be studying the 7th chapter today. Now, for those of you who haven't been with us before, we are going through the Big Book and learning where everything is and how it all ties together, and we're making a pretty thorough review of each of the chapters as we go. Today we will be studying the 7th chapter, which corresponds roughly to the 12th step. And then next week we will be looking at chapters 8, 9, maybe 10 and 11. We'll have to see how that goes. Those chapters do not contain the steps, so they go a little bit quicker. In 2 or 3 weeks we will go back then and we will begin our study of the steps, and we concentrate on how to teach the steps. In other words, we go through the steps as a sponsor will, figuring out and finding out how to teach somebody else to work them. So we take about 18 weeks to do that. The entire workshop is a 35, 36-week commitment. A lot of the people who are here today have been at every session since we started this cycle. So, let's start the meeting with a moment of silent meditation, and we'll say the Serenity Prayer together. Thank you, serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. They may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for a membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. And AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, nor wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober, help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. If we have anyone here with us today who's been out improving their resume and doing further research who'd like to introduce yourself? Anyone who's in their first AA meeting like to tell us your first name? And anyone who's visiting from out of town, other groups, out of state or outer space?
My name's Larry. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey Larry, where are you from, Larry? Where are you from, Larry?
I go to the Hillsborough Garden Club.
Oh, okay, good. We're glad you're here. Anyone else who's visiting? Now, please open your books up to page 89. Page 89. This is the beginning of chapter 7. Now, before we get into the chapter itself, it's important for us to get a little bit of additional information. It is commonly believed that chapter 7 encompasses the entire 12th step, but this is not true. Chapter 7 does not deal with two aspects of the 12th step, namely a spiritual awakening, which is nowhere described or defined in the big book as such, nor does it attempt to deal with practicing these principles in all of our affairs. So when we look at chapter 7, what we're really looking at is a partial description of the work that we do when we're trying to help somebody who's new. And then, of course, in addition to that, some description of our efforts after the person has worked the steps and is somewhat on their way. But basically, this chapter has to do with how we work with somebody who's brand new. Now, if we look at the 12th step, we have to understand what that step is saying to us. And many do not. And this is important to teach your sponsees this. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. This message is the steps. These principles are the steps. The subject of the 12th step is the steps. We would like to think it is spiritual awakening, but that's merely descriptive of what has happened to us. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message, the message of the steps, to other alcoholics and to practice these principles, these steps, in all of our affairs. Now, a lot of people are confused, and we need to unconfuse them when we're working with them. Because there's so much out there today that revolves around this idea that there are principles behind the steps. There are no principles behind the steps. There cannot be, because the steps are the principles, and the principles are the steps. The so-called principles behind the steps were a made-up list put together by three guys in Texas or in California, depending on who you listen to. Sent into the grapevine, and very sillily they published them. If you look at those so-called principles, you'll find they don't even match. I mean, they're not even intelligently done, let alone being true. So when we look at the steps, we need to remember what we're looking at is the principles upon which this program is based. So now we're dealing here with we must deal with two aspects of the 12-step which are not included in Chapter 7, but are included in the balance of the big book, so that we need to examine these two things and see where they come from and how we can explain them to our sponsees. Let's consider a spiritual awakening first. The term itself appears nowhere else in the big book except in the 12th step. Originally, when Bill wrote it, it was a spiritual experience, and that was changed by the editorial committees to spiritual awakening, without explanation and without definition. Spiritual experience, on the other hand, appears many times in the big book, and we have a pretty good idea of what that means. It does not mean, in most cases, it does not mean an epiphany. It does not mean a bright light experience or a burning bush experience. That sudden, powerful spiritual experience which transforms the individual. As used in the big book, spiritual experience refers to the coming of a place of surrender, of obedience. It refers to us having entered the world of the Spirit and become God-conscious and developing a vital sixth sense and being restored to sanity. So when we look at spiritual awakening, then we can clearly see that it refers to exactly that. And we find most of the spiritual awakening detailed for us a couple of pages back, on pages 84 and 85. Let's take a look so we can see what a spiritual awakening really is. If you go on page 84, there's a partial paragraph at the top of the page, then a small first paragraph, and go to the second paragraph, which is in the middle of the page. Go down 5 lines. We have entered the world of the Spirit. Now this is quite significant, isn't it? Because when we were back there in our 4th step, we were told that we were blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit. That the things which were wrong with us, the defects of character and the insanities and the guilt, were blocking us from God, blocking us from the sunlight of the Spirit. And now we're told that we have entered the world of the Spirit. And this is a major part of our spiritual awakening. Going down to the bottom of page 84, the 3rd line up. By this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we'll find this has happened automatically. This is a part of the spiritual awakening. And you show your sponsees how that ties in directly with the 2nd step. That we come to believe in the 2nd step that God can restore us to sanity. And here, when we reach the 10th step, we find that this has indeed happened. We have been restored to sanity. This is another part of the spiritual awakening. If you go on down now to the last paragraph on page 85. 3rd line. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us. In other words, we have been awakened to the Spirit as it has flowed into us because we have followed directions. Now notice that if we carefully follow directions, ties in exactly with the 12th step, doesn't it? That this will happen as the result of these steps. So it's telling us here that if we follow the directions and work the steps, that we will have commenced to sense the flow of God's Spirit into us. And then the next line, to some extent we have become God conscious. And this is a consciousness of the God within. And let's see how that ties in. Please go back to page 55. I'm sorry, 53, page 53. Doggone it anyway, I had you on the right page to begin with. 55. I should trust my own memory. The third full paragraph on page 55, the last 3 lines in that paragraph. We found the great reality deep down within us. And the last analysis is only there that He may be found. It was so with us. If you go back to page 85 and let's reread what it says. That last full paragraph. To some extent we have become God conscious, which means precisely that we have now become conscious of the God within. And then finally, the next line. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense. What that means is that we have now established a connection with God. That we can be inspired by Him. That we can be in contact with Him in some spiritual way. That we can be not only inspired, but we can receive intuitively God's will for us. That's what it means to develop a vital sixth sense. And this is all part of the spiritual awakening. In addition to that, we're pretty sure that spiritual awakening will encompass some other things. For example, the coming of humility. And humility is engendered principally in us by the fact that we have come to recognize and to realize and to accept the fact that God has all the power and we have none. And if we accept and recognize that, then there's nothing left for us to be prideful about. It also represents and connotes the coming of gratitude. Gratitude is of extreme importance. You need to remember this. When you feel ungrateful, look closely to see what's wrong spiritually, because gratitude is a perfect gauge of our spiritual fitness. When we feel ungrateful, we know there's something wrong spiritually. And you get to carry that message to your sponsees and help them to understand that. When you're filled with gratitude, you're high spiritually. You can count on it. We also have found, as part of the spiritual awakening, a high degree of self-honesty. Remember how important that is. Paul just read it a little while ago in chapter 5. It tells us that those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually, persons who are unwilling or unable or incapable of being honest with themselves. So, self-honesty as opposed to self-delusion is a bottom line here. And self-honesty is something we learn and we experience, and with God's grace we begin to be able to practice a high degree of self-honesty. A lot of that we learn to do as we work our 4th and 5th steps. And so that too must be a part of our spiritual awakening. And all of these things then combined lead us to something which is very, very important to understand. We tried to carry this message to other alcoholics. What this really means is that because we've worked the steps and we've had a spiritual awakening, we now are empowered and we will be given the opportunity to carry this message to others. And that will save our lives, because we cannot keep the spiritual awakening if we're not willing to give it away. And our empowerment is an answer to the third step prayer. This is an interesting sidelight, but think about it for a second. In the third step prayer, we ask God, take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. We are asking God to make us examples of His power, His love, and His way of life working in and through us so that we can be helpful to others. And that prayer is being answered right here in the 12th step. And so we have the empowerment and we have the opportunity. We have to take it. That's why you guys are here, to learn how to more effectively carry this message and to give away what you have been given. Because otherwise, none of us can keep it. It is so critically important for us to learn how to do this and to be willing to do it and to not shirk our duties. And this brings us to something which we all need to understand and we need to teach. Look at page 77, please. If you're fairly new, this may be news to you. I hope it is, and I hope you think about it and understand what it's saying. Top of page 77. And of course, this will apply to the people you're sponsoring who are new. This is what they're going to think. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order. And so many people have come in here simply because their lives are so messed up. And they're looking for some way out. And many people come in here because they're forced to come in here and get their papers signed. Many people come in here because their employers have told them to, or their families, or their doctor. Thinking, well, if I go to AA, maybe it'll help me get my affairs in order, put my life in order. And unfortunately, there's a whole lot of emphasis on that. When we emphasize the first step as being about unmanageability of our lives, we unconsciously emphasize the wrong thing. The unmanageability of our lives is something that automatically straightens out when we have committed ourselves to live according to the spiritual principles and have surrendered to God. Let's see how this goes on. Remember, it says at the moment we're trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. And here's the rule. One little sentence. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And that goes directly, does it not, to the 12th step. Carry this message to other alcoholics. Practice these principles in all my affairs. And so now we begin to see how all this stuff ties together. And if we're thinking in terms of carrying the message, we do this not only because it is the only way that we know of that we can keep the grace that's been given us, but we do it because it's something which we are committed to do. We've been given a great gift to be able to do it. It is our mission, it is our purpose in life. That's why you guys are here, so that you learn how to more fully perform your mission and carry out your mission, which is to carry God's message to others, to be of maximum service to Him and our fellows. So that's the spiritual awakening. Then is quite clear. I think when we look at the whole of the big book, we can see what that means. Now, how about practicing these principles in all of our affairs? Remember, the principles are the steps. Simple. If we're going to practice the principles in all of our affairs, it means we're going to be working the steps in everything we do. As we live our lives, we will work the steps. Let's go back to page 84 just for a second, and then page 85. On page 84, that same middle paragraph, this is the 10th step. Go to the middle of that paragraph, about 2/3 of the way down the page. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. That phrase means to grow in our understanding of God, the God of my understanding. That phrase is turned around here to show us that it is through our actions that our understanding of our higher power will grow. And effectiveness means to grow in the effectiveness in carrying the message. And then it tells us this is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. So we're committing ourselves here to a lifetime of effort, a lifetime of work, a lifetime of surrender. And this means that as we go through each of our days, we're going to be continuing to practice these steps. We're going to be using them in everything we do. Go to page 85 now. The first full paragraph starts about 1/3 of the way down the page. It's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We're headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. We are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve, contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. You can insert the word therefore next. Therefore, every day is a day when we must carry a vision of God's will into all of our activities. How can I best serve Thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. What this means is that each day we're going to be taking these steps and we're going to be making them a part of our daily living. There's one more place that we have to look at. Turn back one page to page 83, please. This two little sentences here tells us the whole story. The second full paragraph, 1/3 of the way down the page. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. And living this spiritual life means practicing these steps in everything we do. And Bill Wilson, in his story, way back in the beginning of the book, made it clear that we must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. There are no exceptions. There are no weasel words here, no out clauses. What we have, in fact, are categorical imperatives. We have musts. And a must in the big book means or else. Or else. And the or else is pretty nasty to contemplate. Because for us, or else means, at the very least, we're going back out, and at the worst, we're going to die. And so, this is real serious stuff. Now, the other side of the coin, and it's real important when you got somebody new, to make sure they understand it, that if they will follow these directions, and you will teach them how to do that, and continue to do so for the rest of their lives, that they'll never drink again, which is the truth. They will find that they couldn't drink even if they wanted to. It gets to a point where they are so immersed in God's will that alcohol is a non-issue. Dr. Bob made it clear in his story. He said about these steps, they never fail. They never fail. But all we have to do is go about them with 1/2 the zeal we used to go about getting the next drink. And when we're talking to our new people, this is what we explain to them. Look them right in the eye and tell them, I promise you, if you do this work, you're going to be just fine. And that's the truth. And you can say that without any trepidation whatsoever. It's the absolute truth. So now that brings us then to this question of how do we work with others. Let's get a little background on this one too, because this is important to understand how this came about. In chapter 7 we're going to find first 7 or 8 pages contain the directions for working with a brand new person. And once you understand what's in those pages, you never have to wonder ever again how to deal with somebody who's brand new. You'll be able to know exactly what to do and how to approach them and how to carry the message to somebody who's new. But there's a history to this, where it came from and how did it come about. Remember that when Bill first got sober and he came out of Towns Hospital, he had decided, and his wife agreed with him, that he was going to be necessary for him to take what he had learned and take it out and teach it to others, so that they too could recover. In other words, that he had to give back what he'd been given. And his friend Evie had said, "Yes, Bill, faith without works is dead. It's important to get out there and carry this message." So Bill tried doing it. His methods were crude, to say the least. Things like coming into a bar, seeing somebody who's sitting there at the bar stool getting sloshed, walking up to him saying, "You may be an alcoholic. Get on your knees and start praying." That didn't work very well. So toward the end of the first 6 months, when Bill was completely frustrated and unhappy and he was getting real depressed because he wasn't getting anybody sober, he went to Dr. Silkworth and he asked Silkworth what was the problem. And Silkworth told him, "Bill, you're not doing it right. Let me explain to you what you got to do. First of all, you have to get their confidence. They have to feel you know what you're talking about. You have to establish your credibility. More important than that, even if they'll listen to you, you've got to tell them what's wrong with them. Tell them about this disease. Tell them what happens to them. Tell them how the disease works. Tell them about the obsession, the compulsion to drink, those strange mental blank spots where we have no power, no control, about the insanity of that first drink. And tell them about the physical aspects of the disease, the allergy. Tell them that if they're an alcoholic, they can never safely take another drop of alcohol as long as they live, because it will set off a phenomenon of craving. But most important, make sure they understand that this is a disease which is incurable, which is invariably fatal, and is progressive, so that they understand that. And then you can tell them how you recovered. So, that's what we're going to find. In general, what Dr. Silkworth laid out for Bill that day was what he carried with him when he went to Akron, not having any idea, of course, that he was going to run into anybody like Dr. Bob. He went there on business. But he was carrying with him what Dr. Silkworth had told him, and he had great respect for Silkworth, and he believed him. And so when he met Dr. Bob, and he had the opportunity then to follow through with what Silkworth had told him he ought to be doing, son of a gun, it worked. Now when we read chapter 7, we read it with the understanding that what's in here has never really changed from what Silkworth told Bill, because he was right. And so we're going to find in some detail here just how to go about doing this and carrying the message to the new person just in the way that Silkworth told Bill to carry the message. And we will find in the first 7 or 8 pages that this is laid out in great detail for us, so that we can study this and we can feel quite confident in working with somebody new. Thereafter, there is considerable discussion about various aspects of working with others. In essence, the first partial manual for sponsorship. Now keep in mind, please, there were no sponsors in these days when this book was written in 1939. The first sponsors in the literature, the first time sponsorship is mentioned in the literature is not till 1947. And in those days they were appointing sponsors for new people with the idea that they'd help them get started. The big book talks about spiritual advisors, and that's fine. And many times that did not refer to other members, it referred to ministers or rabbis or monsignors or somebody who was in the spiritual business. And yet, there's enough information in here to give us at least a little bit of a head start on sponsorship, and we need to read these pages carefully and understand what they're saying. Also, the latter part of this chapter debunks some of the main mythology that floats around here. It emphasizes, for example, the importance of motive. It tells us, in effect, that when we did our 11th step, we were taking a PhD in motive, in recovery, learning about motive, how important that is. This chapter emphasizes motive and its importance. It also talks about the more specific, basic things. That is where our reliance must lie. It talks about some of the things that have to do with when do you try to help somebody and when do you leave them alone. So there's a lot of good material in here. It does not attempt to cover the whole field of sponsorship. That's another reason that we do this workshop, so that we can get more deeply into sponsorship. This chapter also contains in one sentence the definition of sponsorship, the only definition we really need, where it tells us that both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. That's it. If we remember that, we will be very effective sponsors. We are not bosses. We're not controllers. We are not bankers. We're not employment agencies. We have no business trying to manage or micromanage the life of another person. We have absolutely no business in making another person dependent upon us. We have to be very careful not to sponsor with ego, not to put notches in our belt, not to go around bragging about how many people we sponsor. We have to remember that a sponsorship relationship is one which is made in heaven. We have to accept the people who come to us as being inspired to come to us. That may not always be true, but we'll never be wrong if we accept it that way. It is not a burden, it is a privilege. And when someone asks you to sponsor them, they are honoring you with their trust and confidence, and we cannot break that. We carry those confidences to the grave. We carry them into the depths of the federal penal system if we need to. We don't break a confidence ever. And when we accept our responsibilities in the relationship as being God-inspired and an honor to us, then we understand the true relationship between us and our sponsee. We are not superior. We are teachers. We have absolutely no business attempting to control their lives in any way. Quite the contrary, we must teach them how to live their lives with God's help. We must teach them to stand on their own 2 feet and not ever to be dependent upon us, but to be dependent upon God. That's our job. And when we do that, and we understand what our job is, it makes it so much easier. We don't have to run around with all our power mechanisms and control mechanisms intact. We don't have to say, call me every day or I'll fire you. That's just where it starts. The moment that we think that somehow or another that is the proper way to be a sponsor, we're on the wrong road. How about, I'm always available to you. Why don't you try to give me a call once a day at first while you're getting started? That might be helpful to you. You got to remember that your sponsee did not hire you, and you did not hire him or her. You're put together because it's a spiritual relationship. And you can't fire somebody you never hired in the first place. I remember the first time I heard that, I said, what in the hell is this? I don't believe this. Anyway, that's an aside point. Okay, page 89. These first two paragraphs on page 89 are real important for your sponsees to read and understand. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. This tells us, does it not, that our program of Alcoholics Anonymous is based upon one alcoholic working with another. Please don't forget that. We sometimes think that the bottom line around here is meetings. Not true. The bottom line around here is one alcoholic working with another, carrying the message. That's where it started, and that's where it still resides. We can help when no one else can for the simple reason that we have been there before. And therefore, when we work with somebody new, they believe us. They know and they can see that we know what we're talking about. Remember what Dr. Bob said about Bill. Dr. Bob had been counseled and had been through the ringer all over town in Akron, everybody trying to help him. The ministers and doctors and everybody else. But he said about Bill, he was the first person who ever knew what he was talking about. And so that's exactly the way that came down. And we can do this. Now, this raised a very interesting sidelight. And I don't mean to confuse anybody, but here it is, anyhow. There's a lot of talk around the rooms that we cannot, if we're an alcoholic, we can't help an addict. And to some extent that may be true, to this extent. That if we are working with somebody who's brand new, and we're an alcoholic and they're an addict, we may not have the kind of experience which would translate into credibility. But once they have taken their first step, we're going to find that all the other steps are exactly the same. They may not be the same as you find in the NA book, but they are nevertheless the 12 steps which work for everybody. So our problem with people other than alcoholics, if that's what our problem is that we may not have the experience which would be sufficient to get them to have confidence and rely upon us in our first contact with them. Let's go on now. Life will take on a new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. Gene and I were talking about this before the meeting. There's something extraordinary about the feelings that you get when you've been helping somebody or you've watched them being helped by others, and you see the light come back in their eyes, and you see their whole life begin to change, and it's right in front of you. You can see it happening. And it's an absolutely incredible experience to be able to see that. Because you know that there's a power there working, and that everything that you believe and everything you're teaching is true, and that it in fact works, and that we've been given this extraordinary opportunity and extraordinary power to carry God's message for Him, so that others can recover. And at the same time, of course, when we do that, we get to recover and stay recovered. Now then, I'm going to epitomize what we will find in the pages from here all the way up to page 95. And then we'll take a look at what goes after that. You might want to note this down. What I'm going to be condensing for you is what you will find when you read these pages in detail. Remember, when we're reading the big book, we read it word for word, phrase by phrase, sentence by sentence. We parse the sentences. We make sure we understand what we're reading, because it is so dense that if we don't do that, we miss things. Let's assume now that you now have the opportunity to work with somebody who's new. Perhaps they have come into the room and you've sat down with them and they've told you that they're new and they've asked for help. Or perhaps they're just saying, I'm new and I'm confused, I'm scared, I'm unhappy, I feel hopeless and helpless. Where do you go from here? Now, sometimes, of course, you'll be contacted by their families, or perhaps by a minister, someone, an employer, someone who knows them. This will happen occasionally. But the first thing we must do is we get them alone. Get them alone. This part of the 12th step is not conducted as a group exercise, it is very bad form for a newcomer who's come into the room and been identified themselves as such to have a whole gaggle of old-timers surround them and begin to importune them about sobriety. What it turns out to be usually is a contest among the old-timers to see who's got the loudest voice or the greatest recovery, or can impress as being the most important guru. And so the little newcomer sits there, might be a big newcomer, 6'9", but doesn't matter. Totally confused, not having any idea to whom they should listen. We don't do that. We get them alone. The next thing we do is we find out as much about them as we can. Sometimes you can find out from the family or employers or someone else, but usually we find out from them. We're not talking about a full autobiography. We're not a treatment center here. But we do want to know some basic things. How old are they? They married or not? Got any children or not? Where do they work? Are they working? Where they live? Where are they from? Just the basic stuff. And one of the important things to find out is if they have a church affiliation, or if they had a church affiliation in the past. And once we are satisfied that we know a little bit about them, this is where our job begins. Now, remember again that our quest here, our point here, is to establish credibility with them, to establish with them our bona fides, to let them see that we know what we're talking about and that we have something to give to them, rather than just to be critical of them or to try to convince them that they ought to stop drinking. That's what's happened to them in the past. We're going to be entirely different. So what do? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to tell them about our drinking. We're going to tell them how we drank. We're going to recite our drinking history in very brief terms, enough so that they can begin to spot their own the progression of their own disease, their own drinking, as they listen to us. Then we're going to tell them about what alcohol did to us. We're going to tell them about the terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair, which you will find, by the way, the terrible four horsemen on the first page of the 11th chapter. Terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. We're going to tell them about the rages, the dishonesties. We're going to tell them about the deep and abiding selfishness, about the ruined relationships, the ruined businesses, the ruined families, our ruined health, all of these things that have happened to us, some of which will have happened with them. So now they're beginning to identify even more strongly with us. And then we're going to tell them how we tried to stop and couldn't. We're going to tell them about our attempts to control our drinking and our attempts to stop drinking on our own. We're going to express to them, in terms of our own history, the powerlessness that we have over alcohol, that we've tried and could not stop. We've tried and could not modify our drinking. We would drink when we were scared to death of drinking. We would drink when we had taken a solemn oath not to drink. We would drink when to drink would mean to fail in something which otherwise we could easily do, and on and on. So that by this time they ought to really get the idea that we've been there before them, and that they can rely upon us because we know what they're going through. Once we have done this, then our next step is to tell them about the disease, and we need to be fully familiar with the doctor's opinion. We need to tell them exactly what they have if they're an alcoholic like us, that they have a disease which is both physical and mental, but especially spiritual, that the physical aspects of the disease are an allergy type of response to alcohol, which means simply that once we take alcohol in its form into our system, it sets up a craving that we cannot deny. And that the first drink sets off this craving. And once that craving has been started, we just can't stop. And most of the times we will drink until we pass out. That we're not drinking anymore to have fun. We're not drinking anymore to be convivial, to be relieved of our troubles. We're finally are drinking because we have to, and we can't stop, and we're powerless. And we tell them about those strange mental blank spots where we have every good intention of not drinking, and all of a sudden find ourselves without any explanation at all, just suddenly we're drinking again, and we say, my God, what happened? We tell them about the spiritual bankruptcy, which is a very substantial part of the disease. And once we have described the disease of alcoholism as being incurable, invariably fatal, and progressive, now they have a fair idea of what they're facing. Now, by the way, this is something which goes back to what Dr. Silkworth told Bill, and we talked about this in the first hour. You see, what had happened there was that when Bill was in the hospital with Dr. Silkworth the second time, when he came out, when he was being discharged from the hospital, Bill told him, and he told Lois, that he was going to die within a year if he didn't stop drinking, and that there was nothing they could do to help him. He was, from now on, it was one thing or the other, either quit drinking or die. And Bill took that to heart, and Dr. Silkworth considered that was one of the major reasons that Bill was willing to listen to Ebby when Ebby came to his house. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make sure that the new person understands what it is that's wrong with them. Now, if we have done all of this and they're still interested, then we're going to tell them how we recovered. And it is only at that point that we do this. And we go into, in brief, with the 12 steps and the program. But the big book tells us something which is real important to understand. Look at page 93, top of the page. Down at the bottom of 92, last sentence. Even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he has become very curious to know how you got well. Let him ask you that question, if he will. Tell him exactly what happened to you. You notice that the big book is making sure we understand here that we're not to leave anything out. We're not to be afraid to tell this new person precisely how we recovered, just exactly as we learn in the foreword of the first edition in our big book, that's the way this book was written, for the purpose of letting us know precisely how they recovered. So tell them exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual freely. Please don't listen to people around here say things like you can't tell them about God, you might scare them away. Don't talk about spirituality. Don't talk about spiritual recovery. Just tell them don't drink and go to meetings. And come back and do 90 meetings in 90 days and read the doctor's opinion in the first 2 chapters. And by the way, you might, if you think about it, you might pray once in a while. We tell them right up front that our recovery was based upon finding and surrendering to and doing the will of a higher power, because that's the truth. And anything less than that is not the truth. And if we're going to start off working with somebody, we better start off telling the truth right off the top. Do we have precedent for this elsewhere in the book? Of course we do. In the 4th chapter, it tells us that what this book is all about is for us to find a power greater than ourselves which will solve our problem. 2 sentences later it says this means we're going to talk about God. And why in the world would you want to try to teach somebody a spiritual way of life, a spiritual program, and be an example to them of that working in your life when you start off with lies? And an omission is just as serious a lie as a commission. If I'm telling you that you can recover by just not drinking, even if your butt falls off, you put a little red wagon and drag it to a meeting, and such nonsense as that, then I'm lying. The big book never once says don't drink. Why would you tell somebody who can't not drink, don't drink? That's why the big book concentrates all of its efforts on teaching us how to get God between us and the booze, because that's the only solution we offer here. And so we tell them exactly how we have recovered. Now then, let's assume that after having done all of this, our new person is sufficiently interested that they want to go forward. Turn to page 95, please. The second full paragraph. Page 95. If he is not interested in your solution, if he expects you to act only as a banker for his financial difficulties, or a nurse for his sprees, you may have to drop him until he changes his mind. This he may do after he gets hurt some more. Sounds rotten, nasty, mean, and so forth, but that's what we have to do. One of the things that we've got to be real careful about is not to allow ourselves to be substituted in as the object of this person's dependency. Because dependency is going to always be one of the major problems that your newcomer has. And what we've got to do is help them wean away from their human dependencies and place their dependency on God. Certainly not on us. If you don't call me every day, I'm going to fire you. You don't wiggle without putting up your hand and asking me permission. A lady last night in a meeting said that her sponsor had told her that she could not go and visit her grandparents, who are both very ill and may die, because that would mean that she was abandoning or shirking her own program. I almost vomited when I heard that. That's so terrible. But remember one thing we always avoid as sponsors. We avoid the ego of sponsorship. There can be no ego involved in it. We're carrying a message, but the results are all up to God, not up to us. If we remember that, then we just do our job as teachers and let God have the results. That way there can be no ego involved. I like to take pride in the fact that I do a good job of carrying the message. But that doesn't mean that I have any right to expect one result one way or another. My job is to carry the message. God's job is to do with the person as He wills, not as I will. I don't get to put any notches in my belt. But boy, does God do a wonderful job when we, for goodness sake, leave Him alone and let Him do His work. Let's go to the next paragraph. This is where it all comes down to. You've told him all your story. You told him how you recovered. If he is sincerely interested and wants to see you again, ask him to read this book in the interval. Please understand, it does not say ask him to read an expurgated Reader's Digest version as your sponsor sees it of this book. And there's a very, very good reason for that. This book was written for the newcomer. In its totality is designed to break down the walls of denial and to bring hope. And there are stories in the back of this book with which that newcomer is bound to identify himself or herself and find himself or herself right there in the page of this book. Not only find their story up to this point, but to find recovery, that the same person who they identify with is now in a state of recovery, and they show how they did that. My gosh, this brings all kinds of hope. I'm going to say I identify with this person, but as far as how they drank, but now look, they recovered. Maybe I can too. Maybe I'm not as hopeless as I think I am. The big book was written to initially break down the walls of recovery, of denial, and to bring hope. After that, as we study it over and over and over again, we learn more and more and more of the details of a spiritual way of life and the directions for working the steps. Ask him to read this book in the interval. If you're a sponsor, you get smart about it because there are whole bunches of tire kickers around. They like what you say. They don't know you from Adam's off ox, and they come up and ask you to sponsor them. And you say, sure. What do you want me to do first? Read the book. The person who's really interested, who really wants it, will read the book. Now that may not always be true, but it's the way I do it. You can take that one or leave it. It works for me. The people who are sincerely interested will read the book. And it shouldn't take all that time. We're not asking them to memorize it. We're not asking them to outline it. We're not asking them to epitomize it in some kind of a 40-page thesis. We're asking them just read it. Read it for effect the first time, but read it. Now let's see what happens. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. Oh. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. Now this next sentence, take this one to heart, guys. This is the basic stuff. If you're working with somebody new, if he is to find God, The desire must come from within. Every attempt that you make out there to browbeat somebody into a first step or a second step is bound to be a failure. The more we try to stuff these things down their throats, the further they draw away from us. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within. What we have to know is that the person walking through that door is either there because it was God's will that he come in, and he's there in accordance to a great miracle that's being worked in his life, or he may very well be there as a result of a nudge from a judge or some other coercion to force him to come in here. Nevertheless, every once in a while one of those people sticks around, gets sober, and becomes an extremely important part of the program. You never know which one it's going to be. And every once in a while somebody who's here under coercion will find that the great gift is given to them as well, that they have come to want to find God. The desire must come from within. Now then, let's say that we've got this new person and he or she's read the book. What's next? Turn over to page 86, please. I'm sorry, 96. 9:6. In spite of everything that you hear around the rooms, this is the way the big book teaches us, and incidentally, this is the way it was done. And this is I can only tell you this: if you read the history of AA, if you read the way 12-stepping was done in the beginning, you will find, for example, that Dr. Bob had newcomers up in his study the first night on their knees praying. They didn't mess around. They got right to it and got it done. You're going to hear all kinds of crazy things like you can't start the steps until you're 6 months sober. Take one step a year. Take one step a month. It doesn't matter how you work the steps, just so long as you work them. You can make up anything you want as long as it works. That's all we care. Well, that's fine. But if we're going to be sponsors, I suggest strongly that we know what the big book says to do and follow that, because as of this sitting, as we sit here together, millions of people have already used what's in this book to recover. That ought to teach us something, I would think. That here is a method of recovery that in fact demonstrably works. And it is not some philosophical or psychological treatise devised by some little gal who went and got her master's degree in psych and is now a grand guru counselor of alcoholism and addiction, and writing some kind of stuff off the top of her head or out of her psych books, because that stuff doesn't work. I don't care how you cut it, and I have no quarrel with anybody who's trying to help us. But I can promise you this: if it's not in the book, you can forget it. Let's go to this last paragraph. The second paragraph in the middle of page 96. Suppose now you're making your second visit to the man. He has read this volume, says he's prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. What's it say in chapter 5? If you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are what? Ready to take certain steps. That's where that comes from. Right here. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story. But do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult someone else. Notice it never says don't insist upon it. Tell him it's okay. You can go out there and skate along and putz around and do nothing for a while if that's what you want to do. We're not going to advise them to do that. We're going to advise them to get right in the steps, aren't we? Whether they want to do it with us or they want to do it with somebody else, that's fine. We go immediately to the steps. Notice this is at the second meeting. Now, you know, you guys are all adults, and you have the opportunity to make up your own mind, follow your own conscience and your own instincts. And you may feel that the big book is outmoded, that perhaps these old birds didn't really know what they're talking about. I beg to differ, but then you're going to do it your own way. I do beg you, however, to read this carefully and understand that this is what they did, and it worked. And they're trying to tell us precisely how they had recovered. So maybe we ought to pay attention to it. And I can tell you, after having taken over 2,000 people through the steps, I know this stuff works exactly as it's written here. Okay? Now then, when we come back next week, we're going to we'll finish out with chapter 7, and then we'll get into the later chapters and see how they all fit together. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to start our study of the steps and how to teach the steps. I want to thank all of you for being here and letting me share this with you. Do we have any announcements for the good of AA? Do we have any chips to give out, or do we do that? We don't do that in this meeting, do we?
We haven't, but we could.
Anybody need a chip today? Not that chip. Put down the potato chip. Tom, you're Sergeant Arts. Bar that guy from any more workshops. Okay. No announcements? Oh, yes. Remember, 7:30 tonight, we're studying the big book right here at 7:30 to 9. The Stairway Group has its second meeting.
9:15. Is there anything going on then?
9:15, we're doing the language of the heart. Anybody have any... Hey, psh, psh, psh. I'm not through with you guys yet. Quiet. Thank you. Does anyone have an irresistible impulse? Otherwise known as a burning desire?
Yeah, I do. I just want to thank you, Jim.
You're welcome, Peach. So good to see you. Let's close the meeting. Let this circle represent the unity of our fellowship. On the silence for those who are still suffering. And we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. Just remember in the stairway group, we don't say anything after we say amen. Thank you. Lord's Prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Amen.
Okay, guys, thanks a lot. Customary traditionalist group to read a portion of chapter 5 from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Our friend Paul's going to do that for us today. Page 58, please open your books. Please teach your sponsees to have a book when they come to a meeting and to follow along with the reading of chapter 5. Everything, the whole program of AA is incorporated in that one chapter, and especially in those first 3 pages. It's very important to get to know it and to follow it and to understand what's being said. Go ahead, Paul.
Chapter 5, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who is thoroughly follow a path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They're not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. At some of these we walked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all these things at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaim, "What an order, I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if He was.
Good. Thank you, Paul.